China and the U.S. are just days away from imposing additional tariffs on each other's goods. Can a Phase 1 deal be reached by the deadline this Sunday? And as a Guantanamo detainee releases horrifying sketches of his torture at the hands of the U.S. CIA, what are these drawings telling the world? Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. The clock is ticking towards December the 15th, a deadline when more tariffs are set to be imposed on Chinese imports to the U.S. China is also set to retaliate on the same day. Experts have signaled that U.S. President Donald Trump's signing of the so-called Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act of 2019 has dampened the prospect of a Phase 1 deal. Meanwhile, China's latest figures show that China's overall foreign trade remained stable, increasing by 2.4% year-on-year. So what's the likelihood of a Phase 1 deal by December the 15th, and what factors are standing in the way? Joining me for the discussion here in the Beijing studio are Zhao Hai, Research Fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Einar Tangen, a current affairs commentator. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So the latest Chinese State Councillor Yang Jiechi had a phone call with the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo last Saturday, where he urged the U.S. side to understand the situation clearly, remedy mistakes, immediately stop slandering China, and cease interfering in China's internal affairs. It's actually quite unusual for China's high official to such a level picking up the call and in very clear terms telling a U.S. official not to do these things. So what are the circumstances of this call? What does he mean by the situation, Zhao Hai?
Because these two acts, one related to Hong Kong, the other one related to Xinjiang, has been a long way coming, because China has been expecting that. And this act has been going through U.S. Congress for quite some time. However, passing this law and actually signed by the president is something very serious, because U.S. is interfering into China's internal politics and also infringing on China's sovereignty. So China has to make a very clear stand that they need to stop that.
Why is Yang Jiechi calling U.S. Secretary Mike Pompeo?
Well, because their counterparts and also Pompeo played a very active role in criticizing China on these two issues. So I think this is a warning to Pompeo that his actions and his words are continuing to make the bilateral relations worse instead of being constructive.
So what's the implication on the trade negotiation between the two sides? Because I remember last time we were sitting here, the three of us, talking about a possible Phase 1 trade deal. Einar, you were saying by then we'll be saying why no deal was reached. It seems that we're edging towards that kind of scenario. What are the implications of all of the issues that we just talked about, the Xinjiang Act, the Hong Kong Act, and Chinese official calling the U.S.
It's not just those acts. You can also add in Taiwan, the sale of arms.
So what are the implications, on
yes,
the trade talks?
The implications are that actually it's a bit of kung fu by the Nancy Pelosi and Shermer. Because what they did is, Trump, you remember a few months ago, he was setting out this idea that he was going to campaign that the Democrats are weak on China, and that therefore, they're afraid of Donald Trump because he's such a hard deal maker. Well, Nancy and Chuck decided they're going to reverse the tables. What they have done is, since that time, Taiwan Relations Act, the situation with Xinjiang and also Hong Kong, passed through the House unanimously, one vote against both, and sailed through the Senate, signed by Donald Trump because he has no choice. Otherwise, he's facing, in essence, a veto-proof type of situation.
Right.
So he doesn't want to lose things. So at this point, if Donald Trump signs a deal, right, the Democrats are going to say, you've made a lot of promises about a structural deal and all you're doing is tit for tat. So he will be under a lot of pressure as being seen as weak. This is not something that Donald Trump likes to do.
So exactly what kind of prospect are we looking at? So we're not going to see any kind of Phase 1 trade deal between the two sides by December the 15th, and the tariffs will go into place? Is that what we're predicting?
Well, I think, first of all, U.S. policy towards China has been forecasted by no other than Vice President Pence things last year, and he made 2 speeches about the U.S. or the whole of government policy towards China. So this is not surprising. But on the other hand, I think China and U.S. are both trying to make the trade issue separate from other issues. So both sides has been making progress.
The U.S. administration trying.
The U.S. administration.
And also China. Yeah.
And also on the Chinese
China.
side.
But is it possible, given the kind of domestic politics within the United States?
So what I'm saying is that both sides are making progress despite worsening of overall relationships in other areas. So there's still hope of reaching a deal, but at this point, to me, it's very unlikely that they're going to reach a deal before December 15th.
But, I mean, in order for a deal to go, China has started insisting a number of times, but it's never been in the administration's narrative, that the tariffs have to be rolled back. Not only not imposed, but rolled back. And that is very, very difficult for Trump to do.
But it's going to further sour relations between the two sides if another...
But the souring of relations started with all of these acts that Pompeo and Pence and all the China hawks were pushing.
So it's actually a very, very peculiar situation. As the two sides continue to engage with each other, working towards a possible deal, they are continuing to slap tariffs on top of each other.
Well, because Trump is postponing the potential of signing this deal and raising the bar again and again, therefore losing the opportunity to reach a deal earlier rather than later. So now the problem is the trade deal is getting more and more into U.S. domestic politics. Just as Einar pointed out, now he's in fear of showing that weakness particularly to the opposition, the Democrats, and potential candidates.
And just let me add, this is not about policy. No one is thinking through the long-term repercussions. This is about next November, who's going to control the House, the Senate, and the President.
So those who are suffering the possible consequences of this trade war will continue to suffer. You mean the administration?
Well, he's willing to toss farmers and anybody else under the bus in order to be reelected. And unfortunately, I would say the same thing for the Democratic side. Right now, they're locked in a battle to see who will be supreme, and anyone who gets in their way is going to suffer.
Meanwhile, it seems that China's overall foreign trade is stable. I mean, it didn't decrease after the first 11 months of this year. Actually, China's foreign trade registered a steady growth of 2.2% year-on-year, and exports climbed 4.5%, and import hit $1.8 trillion, rising by 2.5%. So, Zhao Hai, does that mean that China, after 17 months, is already kind of used to live with the consequences of the moment?
Yes, I think China's economy performed better than expected. I think, generally speaking, in terms of export, China maintained stability, even though on RMB terms it's rising relatively, but on dollar terms it's sliding just a little bit. However, the bright side is actually on the import. Import is increasing better than expected. That means China's domestic economy, domestic consumption is resilient and is still growing.
So, and also very interesting, if we look at the numbers, of course, if we break down the numbers from region to region, China's trade with the United States went down 11%, okay, from January to November this year. However, trade volumes between China and other regions are expanding.
Not just other regions, Belt and Road.
Belt and Road, of course.
Countries gone up by 50%.
Right, as you can see. Let's have that chart again, please. As you can see from that chart, as you can see from that chart, China's trade with the European Union gone up by 7.7%, with ASEAN countries by 13%, with Belt and Road countries gone up by 10%, and only with the United States down by 11%. So what's the implication of the trade war for the United States, Einar?
It lost markets. I mean, remember, American companies to expand, they need new markets, and they're turning away from the U.S. And that is not going to be something replicated. I guarantee you that China is not going to give up the trade with its Belt and Road Initiative countries in favor of pushing it back towards the U.S. So this has long-term repercussions.
And it seems to me that China is actually well positioned to cushion the kind of impact of any tariffs from the United States, because as we can see that European countries or ASEAN
There's
countries,
plenty of
federal
pain going
countries,
around. There's pain being
right,
felt. No one is winning here.
No one is winning, but the United States is definitely not the only country China is trading with in this world. Zhao Hai.
Well, the effect is that overall economic activity and trade are decreasing globally. However, as we can see that there is a global restructuring of supply chains, and therefore China's trade with other countries, I mean, around the world other than the United States, are increasing, but with the U.S. is decreasing. But at the same time, U.S. overall trade deficit has not been decreasing. That means U.S. is increasing trade with other countries. So you can see, basically Donald Trump erected a wall between U.S. and China. However, the trade are going across, circumventing, going through other channels.
They were barking on the wrong tree too,
yeah,
right?
So important for people to realize that the trade deficit has increased under Donald Trump. It has not gone down.
Right. So basically, according to a newspaper opinion piece by the American columnist Paul Krugman, just most recently he said Donald Trump declared that I am a tariff man. Mr. Krugman said that he has failed in the goals he wanted to achieve through the trade war with China. Now investment is falling, trade deficit has widened, and manufacturing output is shrinking. So
Mm.
He is a tariff man, but not in the positive terms, but
there's
very negative.
there's no positive term, but the issue here is this is somebody who has a fundamental non-understanding of basic economics.
with the help of his advisors.
Well, Navarro was picked out because he's the only economist in the world probably who will support his role. And
yeah,
no one agrees with Navarro.
But it's not a surprise, because since very beginning China has been arguing that, okay, if you want to lower your trade deficit, understandable grievances, but ours is not the solution, right?
But again, this is not about economics. It's ultimately about politics, and Trump is speaking to his voters, particularly his base, and those people are sort of like the idea that he has been a tariff man and tough man against China.
And so when is reality going to bite?
I'm going to forecast that 2 months after Christmas, you already see a steady trend now where spending is growing more than disposable income. A lot of the reasons what you haven't seen a lot of inflation in the wages is because people are taking second and third jobs in order to cover their expenses. I think when the reality hits home that after these tariffs go in and households are losing $1,000 a year, and they then have these credit cards come through, I think there's going to be starting to be a change of opinion.
But you think that's going to be enough to make people realize that this policy is not working? Because so far it seems that this small group of base, has been very stubborn.
Just remember, you have let's split America up into 3/3. All right, the Republican base, the Democratic base, and then the independents. The independents are the ones that everyone should be watching. It doesn't, his base is going to vote for him. The Democrats aren't.
Yeah. Well, I think it's hard to say at this point, because the Fed is quite supportive in terms of overall economic growth in the U.S. So even though there's negative impact of tariff, but the U.S. economy so far has been okay. But next year, I think there will be problems if this trade friction continues.
What about
people
China?
are losing hope of reaching a deal.
Yeah, what about China? Is China in a big hurry to reach a deal with the United States?
No. I think China has prepared a lot of measures to counter the possible downward economic pressure. And next year, I think a lot of the new policies will kick in, and China's economy actually has bottomed this year and will pick up some speed next year.
Okay. All right, we're going to leave it there. Many thanks to Zhao Hai from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and Einar Tangen, a current affairs commentator.